horn of trash.
Hey everyone, Sammy the Bull here with you. Real quick, before we get started, I wanted to let you know about our Magic the Gathering Autism Awareness Tournament coming up in April on the 12th, the weekend of the 12th in April. We're going to have a Magic the Gathering tournament, a Commander tournament that is cEDH level, bring your best decks, but it is going to be a charity-driven tournament for Autism Awareness Month. We have partnered up with our local game store, Tier 1 Games, and they're going to be providing us a huge tournament space in their new store out here in Temecula, and we're going to be partnering up also with Autism Society of Los Angeles and Autism Society of Inland Empire. Both of those charities will be out here at the store. We're going to have magic artists out at the store, from actual magic content artists that create the artwork for cards, so not just some random people. These are people that are actually on the cards that you play. So we're gonna have a good time. There's gonna be plenty of chances to donate money, win prizes. We'll have lots of cool stuff there. Last year we did our first tournament just to see how it went, and it went really well. We raised nearly $3,000 for Autism Awareness Month and those charities last year. So we're going to try and do it again. A lot of the proceeds from the tickets that you buy for the event to submit your decks and play in the actual tournament itself, a lot of those proceeds will be going to the charity as well. And it's just going to be a great time. There'll be plenty of opportunities while you're there to donate and look around the store, buy some cool stuff as well from Tier 1 Games. So all around, it's just going to be a great time. If you're in the local area, if you're in the Los Angeles area or the Inland Empire or anywhere in SoCal, you're invited to come on down, or anywhere in the world actually. Come on out here if you really want to help us out with our autism tournament and raise a lot of money for autism by playing a game that we all love and are part of, right? So this is our community, and within our community there are a lot of folks that suffer from autism, and there are a lot of people that have what they call autism as a superpower. So either way though, autism in some way, shape, or form makes you live life a certain way, right? And due to that, we want to make sure that any way that autism is affecting you, that we can be there to help out if that is something that you need. So those charities, Bad Goyfs, Tier 1 Games, all getting together to make this something that is going to be really cool and fun for everybody. You know, bring the family out. It's a family store. It's a family environment. Come on out, play some Magic if you want to. So yeah, it'll be a fun weekend. Again, April 12th, big tournament happening out here in SoCal, Temecula, California, at Tier 1 Games. Bring your best decks. It's a cEDH Commander tournament. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to all of the folks that are out here at Tier 1 Games as well. So yeah, come on out, or just if you can't come on out, you know, we'll have QR codes and all that kind of stuff and ways for you to donate. So please do that. Thanks. Enjoy the show. We are the priests of the temples of ceilings. Yeah. Hold on a minute. Game changers. Game changers? Oh, yeah. I play with like a lot of these cards. All right. Okay. Oh, brackets. Let's see these. Brackets. Yeah. Oh well, you know, like, I mean, my decks should be pretty okay, right? Like, yeah, they're not that. Let's go check out my decks. Let's see here. Let's see it. Oh, 4. Oh, well, I guess all my decks are 4s and 5s. So, what do we need to do here? I mean, I'd like to play with just like, you know, normal pods. I'm not all out to just destroy everybody with my high-powered decks. Or am I? Anyway, let's see. What is Bracket 1? Exhibition? Oh, it's not about winning here. It's not. Winning is not the primary goal. Oh, okay. I mean, isn't the whole goal of Magic to win? Oh, incredibly casual. Bracket 1 is incredibly casual. Okay. Bracket 2? Bracket 2. Oh, not every card. Okay. Power level of the average. Who wants to be average? My I guess some people, most people just in the average range? No way. Upgraded. Decks are stronger. Cool. Bracket 4. This is apparently where I sit with almost every deck I have optimized and go wild. And then cEDH. Bracket 5, cEDH. Oh, so let's just take a look at these decks again of my... Ayula? That's a bear deck. That's a bear deck with bears. But it's bracket 5. Okay. I guess it has some game changers in it. Really changes the game for the old bears. See? Cam and Dylan. Bears are cEDH. Oh, look at that. Throw in a couple of game changers and look who's up in the big leagues now, boys. Ayula coming for that ass. Well, you know, I guess I don't want all of my decks to just be like super high powered and I can't like, you know, play a game with anybody else. So I think what I'm going to do is build a bracket 3 deck. And in fact, I'm looking at the last set that we just kind of went over in Aether Drift. And I'm really liking that new Nissa. In fact, let's get some big Nissa energy on. Hey there, what's happening, Goyfs? It's Sammy the Bull here with you with your anti-depression video segment this week of how to build a bracket 3 deck. It's all going to be based off of all the new game changers and brackets that are going on. Because as you saw just a minute ago, when I looked at my deck list on Moxfield, all of my decks are 4s and 5s. So, pretty outrageous, I guess. Can't really play in like normal pods of Magic. So I decided to go ahead and build a deck so that I can play with people that aren't trying to kill each other on turn 3. So let's get right into it. The deck I decided to build actually comes from a card that I saw in the Aether Drift pre-release view that I did on that video. There was a card, a new Nissa card, the Worldsoul Speaker, and as you can see, she caught my eye pretty good because doing anything with like an alternate cost to me is great. And on top of that, it's a landfall ability, and a landfall ability that gets you 2 energy per land. So to me, instead of having to pay like 12 mana for some giant creature like Eldrazi, then we're going to be instead paying 8 energy for that. So I went ahead on Moxfield, and it took me a while. I went through like something like 185 cards just trying to like optimize and build this deck the right way. And you'll see when we get into it what my it's only a bracket 3 because of 1 card. So I don't really know how like the bracket system works in that regard. I guess, you know, you don't want any game changers in the bracket 1 and 2 because that would really change the game. Crickets? Yeah, probably. Anyway, dad joke there for you. So we'll get right into it. Bracket 3, big Nissa energy. So what I wanted to kind of do with this deck was I wanted to build it around the energy landfall ability of Nissa, right? I wanted to make sure that that was like kind of the main focus. So her ability there, we're going to get her out on the battlefield. That's like our main priority, is to get her out and down so that we can do as much landfall shenanigans as possible. That being said, with this build, I did something that I don't normally do, which is, I mean, I did put a lot of artifacts in here, so that's something I do normally do, but they aren't the artifacts you would think that they are. They're definitely not a lot of mana rocks, and definitely different from what I normally do. I didn't even put a soul ring in this deck, as you'll see, so that's something crazy. The Planeswalkers that I wanted to go over, Nissa and Vivian Reed. So the reason I wanted to kind of go with Nissa and Nissa Vital Force and Vivian Reed, as you can see there, Nissa Vital Force, +1 untapped target land until your next turn it becomes a 5/5. which is great and all, but really the part that I was most interested about is the fact that she's a 5-mana Planeswalker that comes in with 5 loyalty, as you can see down the bottom there, the 5 loyalty. But if you take 1 turn to do the +1 ability, she gets to the point of doing her ultimate, which is the -6, right? You get an emblem. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Hello. Hello, green. Yeah, it may take us like a turn, but with what we have going on in this deck, as you'll see that's coming up, lands entering the battlefield, not going to be a problem. And how many lands can enter the battlefield during a turn? Well, that depends, folks. How many times can you put a creature or enchantment or artifact down that says you may play an additional land? That's basically what we're trying to do with this deck. So, and then of course Vivian Reed there as kind of maybe like a game finisher. She's going to take us to the finish line with her -8 ability to give all of our creatures a huge buff. But really, her biggest thing is to like look at the top card of your library, reveal a creature or land card, right? So she kind of does 2 things for me in this, bracket 3 build, which is, I'm just going, it's kind of cool. So to talk about the brackets just a little bit, that's all I had really for Vivian anyway. But to talk kind of like about the brackets, I think it's actually a really good thing that they've done it like this. So you can kind of see that what these kind of do is they give you a cool parameter to kind of go off of to build a deck now. Instead of the 1 through 10, which before was kind of confusing, you just assumed that cEDH was 10 and then you really didn't know what the rest of the numbers even were. Like, what was a 1 in the 1 to 10 range? What was that? Like, I don't even know what that was. Like, all commons? Were we playing Pauper at level 1? Who knows? I mean, but there are some powerful Pauper decks, so, don't get your knickers in a bunch too much, over that. Anyway, it was just very confusing, and I think the way that the brackets are done was kind of genius in a way, because it's now set up the ability for players to go, oh, okay, now I have some sort of like parameter, something that I can go off of to say, does it meet this criteria? Because I'm trying to build in a level 1, and then I want to play in our play group a level 1 exhibition game, right? And that'll be cool. That'll be fun. Let's do that. Let's all do that. And now all of a sudden you're probably playing with cards that you haven't even seen or played with in years because you're just not used to playing in that level. But then you find out it can be fun, right? But also, again, like I said before, also playing at that level, you're not really playing optimized, and you're not trying to go fast and get a lot of games in. You're going to be looking at games that could go a lot longer, depending on the build, of course, right? So you could build something that just wipes the board out, almost 8 turns or something like that. And that could be a pretty quick game, but, it just all depends on the build. But if you're kind of going off of what Gavin Verhey was saying in the statements he made about what each bracket meant, exhibition level 1 is kind of like really like learning how to play Magic almost, like playing with cards that are not optimized really at all. They're kind of just there to be played with in a very casual, extremely casual fashion, just to have fun, right? Really, we're not really trying to like see who can win the best, and all that kind of stuff. And I would even recommend at that level to not even play with board wipes, right? Just let people kind of go. Don't play with board wipes. Don't play with like a bunch of bounce spells and all that kind of stuff, which are definitely not on the Game Changer. There's some, but there's not a lot. Like, if you look at that Game Changers list, which I'm going to pop up right here, there's not a lot of bounce spells, right? There's Cyclonic Rift, right, and a few others, but like, if you're like, that's really not in the spirit, I would say. Of course it's not in the spirit of Exhibition level 1, because you can't even play with it because it's Game Changer. Now you're into bracket 3 already if you're playing with that card. So don't even play with that. Don't even play with Wrath of God. Don't even play with any of that stuff that like blows things up. Just, I would say, build the coolest deck you just want to build for fun. And that's where you're at in Exhibition and slightly pre-con type of decks in Bracket 2. So, but, me being me, I wanted to be a little bit more powerful and at least kind of like put up a fight and do something kind of cool with a deck, right? And especially with Landfall, that's why I kind of chose Bracket 3 for this video. So, but overall, like I was saying, I think the bracket levels are really well thought out. Just kind of genius, really, the way they did it. There's a couple of minor things here and there, but like as Gavin also said, this is just a starting point. We're gonna kind of improve from here as we go through these brackets. So I think it's great, and it opened my mind to kind of like, oh, you know, I could build this kind of deck, or I could build that kind of deck. It'll fit exactly into this bracket, you know, and then I can use cards that, again, I've never even used before. So there you go. I got a couple of Planeswalkers here. I got the Invasion of Ikoria. It's one of the best green search spells that you have for non-human creatures. And this deck, of course, has a lot of non-human creatures, so that's good. So Battle of Ikoria, or Invasion of Ikoria, that is. It is a battle it comes down kind of like an enchantment, if you haven't seen this card before. So it kind of comes down like an enchantment, and then you have to assign a player to defend that battle as you try to attack it and get it to flip over. Really, most of the time, I don't even bother trying to do that, to attack it and flip over. But in this deck, it could be kind of cool, because the flip side of that is the Zalortha, the giant dinosaur that just crushes the invading force of Phyrexians. Way to go, Zalortha. You crushed those Phyrexians. Anyway, so those are the three there. We got Nissa the Worldsoul Speaker, of course, as our commander. And like she says, you may pay 8 energy rather than pay the mana cost for permanent spells you cast. Yes, please. Let me get 1 billion energy and cast some ridiculous stuff with this deck. So that's what my goal was, and so let's get into it. First thing we want to talk about is our creatures. We got a boatload, in my opinion. I mean, there are decks that have more creatures than this, but for me, this is a lot of creatures. I usually don't have this many creatures in a deck, but it's a literal boatload. 27 creatures plus the commander, which makes it 28 creatures total. And we're just trying to do big, nasty things with this deck. Starting off with that Aetherwind Basker, basically a huge 7/7 lizard that gives you energy for whenever it enters or attacks, and you get energy for each creature you control. Pretty good. Also, this guy, the next to him, is the Aftermath Analyst. This card's ridiculous. This card is so dumb, especially in this deck. So it enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards. You'll see what I'm talking about here. You mill 3 cards, and then it has an ability, 4 mana, sacrifice this analyst, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Don't give me cards like that when in a landfall deck. I'm going to abuse the crap out of it because, yeah. That's what we're here to do, is abuse landfall to the highest degree. Alright, so Ancient Green Warden, people kind of know this card, so oldie but a goodie. Apex Devastator, next to it there, those are cards that people kind of know. So Ancient Green Warden lets you play lands from the graveyard. So any lands that have gone into the graveyard, if I, don't have a way to get them out of the graveyard, like with the Aftermath Analyst, then I can use Ancient Green Warden's ability and play them from the graveyard. So there are a lot of cards like that in this deck, as you'll see. And if land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time, which means not only we don't get 2 energy from Nissa when a land enters, we get 4 energy, because that triggered ability happens twice. Yeah, this deck is so much fun. I'm going to show you I did a screenshot of a test play that I did on Moxfield. So, Apex Devastator there, a huge 10/10 that says it cascades 4 times. Again, a ridiculously huge card that basically puts the game away if it hits something that is devastating enough, right? So Apex Devastator is going to cascade 4 times and get me 4 non-land spells. So as long as it's non-land, like an artifact or a creature, whatever, instant sorcery, anything not a land, I'm going to be casting those. But the way Cascade works, right? So Apex Devastator, we're going to cast that for 8 energy. That's our goal, is to not use any mana lands at all. We're just using the lands to generate energy, essentially, right? It's almost like a hydroelectric plant. That's what we're doing here. Right? I'm going to cycle enough forests to get enough energy to cast huge things like this without paying their mana costs. And then as Apex Devastator is on the stack, right, before it resolves and goes to the battlefield, we're going to cascade 4 times, which means we're going to cast 4 other spells without paying their mana costs prior to Apex Devastator hitting the battlefield. If anybody didn't realize, that's how Cascade works. So, fun shenanigans there. Another cool new card, which is a little landfall creature called the Architect of the Untamed. Her ability is also a landfall ability similar to Nissa's, only you just get 1 energy whenever land enters a battlefield. And then you can pay 8 energy and create a 6/6 colorless artifact beast token. So if we create a metric ton of energy, I can then pump out huge 6/6 creatures. Ridiculous. And then if you go back to the old Aetherwind Basker, and then whenever it attacks, you get energy equal to the number of creatures you control. Yeah, it's just a deck feeding upon itself, right? Feeding itself with the things that it has in it. Of course, Azusa, oldie but a goodie right there. You can play 2 additional lands on your turn, so you can get 2 more landfall triggers, which, of course, if you're playing the lands that I'm playing, and you'll see, you'll get more than just 2. So Crater Hoof Behemoth, another way to kind of end the game. Also, if like you want to, in my opinion, you want to build a deck that kind of at least has a way to end the game and isn't just dirtling around until everybody gets bored and goes home. So yes, dirtling is fun if you're all kind of like looking to play those exhibition level 1, level 2 decks, bracket 1 and 2 decks that dirtle a little bit, but I was kind of like, hey, we're in bracket 3, we're playing a game changer, maybe we should be at least trying to win the game. So that was kind of my thought there. Dryad Elysian Grove, yet again, playing another additional land. Elvish Reclaimer, another way to get lands out on the battlefield and get another landfall trigger, because he allows you to sacrifice a land that you currently have and then search your library for any land card. It doesn't matter what kind of land card it is. As long as it says land on it, you can go search for it and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Awesome addition to this. Here's another major contributor to this deck's ridiculousness is Evolution Sage. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. What does proliferate mean? That means that anything that it has counters, such as energy counters, whenever a land enters, you get a proliferate trigger, which means you can then add 1 counter of any type that is out on the board. So you can increase people's poison counters if you have that, which we didn't really go poison here because we're in bracket 3 and I'm just trying to have fun. But I'm proliferating my own energy counters for sure. And maybe counters on my Planeswalkers if they're out, things like that. Maybe counters that are on my creatures, who knows. But all of that is getting proliferated. If it's counter, it's getting proliferated, which means increased by 1. Whenever a land enters the battlefield. So if you have a ton of lands into the battlefield, you're proliferating quite a bit. Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, really just a huge beatdown annihilator for Eldrazi. We're here to have fun. He is a big beatdown, creature, 12/12, but he does cool things like draws me 4 cards when he enters the battlefield. Also helps this deck to reinvigorate itself. So if he were to get put in the graveyard from somewhere, like milled into my graveyard or something, then all of my graveyard gets shuffled back into my deck and helps keep going, right, to keep these shenanigans going. That can be bad in some situations where, like, if I had a bunch of lands in the graveyard and I was just about to, like, use Aftermath and Analyst, for instance, to get them all back on the battlefield tap. If something like that happens, I'm just gonna wait, because this deck is very good at just refilling the graveyard with a whole bunch of crap, especially lands, and then doing all that same stuff again. So yeah, there's a possibility of that happening, but I'm not really worried about it. Also, it just keeps my deck from being milled out by people who want to build a bracket 3 mill deck, ruin my day and my fun. So with their mill shenanigans. Alright, Loot, the Exuberant Explorer. He's a 1/4, lets you play an additional land on each of your turns. I imagine that's how Loot speaks. He looks like a guy who has a lot of authority, even though he's a little tiny guy. He's like a Napoleon of fox creatures. He's a beast noble. Oh, he comes around and says, hey, my name is Loot. And you will play an additional land on each of your turns. Anyway, Lotus Cobra. So Lotus Cobra is interesting. It doesn't actually add a land, but what it does is, so if I have a mana enter the battlefield, then in my mana pool, I will get a mana of any color. Usually in this deck, green. Because that's all we play is green in this deck. But anyway, Lotus Cobra there to kind of give you a little bit of a boost. As you can see, and I said earlier, I didn't even put a Soul Ring in this deck, so having things like Lotus Cobra Kind of helps you boost your mana pool a little bit early on, as it is only 2 mana to get out. Nissa Resurgent Animus does the same thing as Lotus Cobra. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you will get the Lotus Cobra effect, but if this is the second time the land enters, not only will you get the Lotus Cobra effect, where you get to add a mana to your mana, if this is the second time this ability has resolved, it's too small. Resolve this turn. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an elf or an elemental card. Now that is really... And then put that card into your hand and you can be able to cast it at that point. The rest go on the bottom of your library in any order, or random order. Random order. So that is a really good ability in this deck because I have lots of elves and lots of elementals. So if she were on the battlefield and I was doing crazy shenanigans with lands, guess what? Now I'm going to be able to go find a cool elemental or elf, right? So just to name a few elves, like the Elf Detective, Aftermath Analyst, right? My Elf Warrior, Elvish Reclaimer, Evolution Sage, tons, right? So what's another one? An elemental that's in here? Oh yeah, Titania, Protector of Argoth. Like, get wrecked, right? This is my representation for my second person here to be commentating with me. I know, it's sad. But it also shows off this cool Goyf hat that I had made, which I'm thinking about, you know, if I can get the price point to the correct level, making this part of our Patreon, one of our Patreon giveaways is this little hat here. Cool new things right there. My guy hanging out with me, chilling. Oracle of Moldiah lets us play another additional land. So again, additional lands. The Perennial Behemoth is another way to pull lands out of our graveyard. If we need to, we can play them from our graveyard. Rampaging Aetherhood. Now, this is a card we talked about in the pre-release video. But what it does is kind of necessary for this deck. It's another way to like generate a lot of energy. Kind of like the Aetherwind Basker does. But this thing also, at the beginning of each upkeep, you get an amount of energy equal to this creature's power. Right? So if we're proliferating, we're adding counters to this thing, then you may pay an energy if you do put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature. So if we're generating a lot of energy and this thing's out, and then I get to my next upkeep and it's still out there, it has ward 2, so it has a little bit of protection. I can then add a bunch of energy in one upkeep to my energy pool, right? Which would allow me to cast more things and do more stuff. Root Map Excavator, you may cast lands from your graveyard, or play lands from your graveyard yet again. Secure Scribe Holder is cool. I left it in here because you can sacrifice him and then immediately go find a basic land out of your library and then put it on the battlefield tapped. So when you do that, there's another card in here that you'll see, one of the artifacts that we'll go over, that really cares about things being leaving the battlefield and going into the graveyard. So when things go to the graveyard, that's what it cares about. So you'll see that here in a second. Seaborn Muse is just a classic. Untap all my stuff on each other player's turn. Yes, please. Sylvan Safekeeper, this was my way to kind of keep my commander safe, so I can sack a land to give a target creature Shroud. That's perfect for this deck. That's like the most perfect thing for this deck. Actually, it's ridiculous how perfect that is. Tireless Provisioner, we know what those guys do. The Tireless Tracker and Tireless Provisioner are both kind of landfall creatures that either create you a clue or a treasure or a food. The clue, the investigate part from Tireless Tracker is one of the best parts of this, because while we're using energy to cast a bunch of our spells, we then have a bunch of mana open to use that mana to crack clues and draw more cards. So making a bunch of clues with a bunch of landfall triggers, having a bunch of clues out, and then cracking all those clues to draw more cards out, really good. Titanium Protector of Argoth, another way to create kind of an army here, a big army of 5/3 green elemental creatures. So with her, when she comes to the battlefield, you get to return a land from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you're automatically creating a landfall trigger when she comes in, right? And then whenever a land you control is put into the graveyard from play, or from the battlefield, create a 5/3 green elemental. An elemental. Anyway, so that's her, and she's pretty sweet for this deck. It's like fits right into the whole build for this deck, right? So one of the lands she could return would be like a fetch land type of thing, like a Prismatic Vista or one of the fetch lands that gets a green land. So then you have 2 triggers at that point, and you have a land going back to the graveyard while she's out, right? So she'll come in, return that fetch land to the battlefield, and then once, because the important thing about her is it doesn't come to the battlefield tapped. It just comes back onto the battlefield. So you bring that back out, crack that fetch land, whatever, to go search for another land and get another land trigger. Now you got a land entering the graveyard, creating a 5/3 elemental, and then you're getting another landfall trigger because you get to go search for another land with your fetch land. How convenient. Toski we just threw in here because whenever we do have an army and we try to go ahead and attack, we want to be able to capitalize on that, draw some cards. Wayward Swordtooth, again, an additional land being played. And then again, another way to hopefully, possibly, maybe put the game away and win is Zofandrel. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right? So those are the creatures right there. Pretty good. This list may change. I might end up, taking out a few of these things. Maybe even taking out, like, I don't know, a couple of things and just putting in, like, huge, giant threats like Eldrazi's and stuff. So, again, this is just my build. I'm just doing this for fun, and I tried to optimize it the best way I could for the maximum, like, landfall, create energy, and do things with the energy kind of build, but you can go different ways with this deck and really make it something ridiculous. Okay, so moving on, we're going to get into our sorceries, instants, and enchantments here. Sorcery, obviously, Attune with Ether is pretty good because it's a basic land card that you can go get out of your deck and also create 2 energy while doing it. All for the low price of 1 green mana. So now these cards, except for the enchantments, these cards here, instants and sorceries, these are the one things that you cannot cast with Nissa. So they're kind of limited in this deck because I can't do them with Nissa. Her ability only allows me to use the energy to cast permanents. So we have a lot of permanents. We have fuse, instants, and sorceries. But the ones we do have are pretty key, right? So Finale of Devastation, that's another way to get Craterhoof Behemoth out. And if you have all this land that you have out on the battlefield, then you're going to be able to get that to the 10 or more requirement where creatures you control get +X/+X and gain haste until end of turn. On top of getting the creature you want to get out is usually Craterhoof Behemoth with that. And then Craterhoof Behemoth adds another +X and gives everything trample. So then they're all hasty, trampley, gigantic creatures, and you just win the game that way. And this is all in Bracket 3, folks. It's in Bracket 3. Right? So not fully optimized. We're not playing cEDH, but we are playing some powerful Bracket 3 optimized stuff here. Right? So Flare of Cultivation, another way to sack a non-token green creature so you can cultivate effect, right? So you put 1 card, 1 basic land on the battlefield, and 1 land goes into your hand. And then Gaia's Blessing is another way to ensure that I do not get milled to death. Life from the Loam, another way to recur lands back into your hand so you get more landfall triggers. And then the creme de la creme of doing a crap ton of landfall triggers is Scapeshift. 2 green mana, 2 of any color, sorcery, sacrifice any number of lands. Search your library for up to that many land cards. So there's no basic land requirement here. This could be any land cards that are left in your deck. And folks, I'm going to tell you, if you build this deck or if you build something like this deck, Scapeshift is going to definitely need to be part of your repertoire. And at all times, I would recommend a full land board wipe of your own lands and getting out back as many lands as you possibly can. So use Scapeshift to maximum effect in this deck, especially if Nissa's out and you have a Proliferator or the other little elf that creates an energy whenever they're landfall. Landfall triggers galore with Scapeshift. So do it. Another way for doing sort of a Scapeshift, but it's only like for 1 land, is these three instants right here. The Crop Rotation, Intis Restoration, and Harrow, they're all kind of the same. You sacrifice a land, and then you go search your library for a land, which is Crop Rotation because it only costs 1 mana. But for 3, which is Harrow and Intis Restoration, you can go get up to 2 basic lands, and both of them go onto the battlefield, but they come in tapped. Now, Intis Restoration is good because if you have a creature power 4 or greater, which most likely we will, given the fact that we have a lot of huge creatures in this deck, you get to have 3 basic lands enter the battlefield tapped, which gives you 3 more landfall triggers, which, if Nissa is out just by herself, that's 6 energy, right? That's almost enough, almost getting to 8 energy and being able to cast yet another permanent. So these cards, I think, are important to this deck. You maybe not need to play with all 3, maybe you just need to play with 1 or 2. Depends on your build, whatever you're doing, right? Then another way to protect your stuff, Heroic Intervention, that's a classic, everybody knows it. And then Worldly Tutor, not even a game changer. One of the best creature tutors in Magic because it's an instant 1 mana spell that you can do on the end of your opponent's turn. Put the creature that you need on to the top of your deck at the end of their turn. Go to your turn, you're drawing now that creature that you need. And in this deck, it's going to be, either something that plays an additional land, or if you're in dire need, something that just creates energy. Whatever the case may be, you're putting the best creature that you need for the moment that you're in, right? Whatever's happening on the battlefield, putting that best creature up on top of that deck, and then drawing it on your turn. So, yeah, not even a game changer, folks. How crazy is that? So, there you go. Now, our enchantments here. Carefully chosen enchantments. I wanted to make sure I was putting, the best of the best in here. There are maybe some other ones you could do, but, these are the best ones that I could find that we're going to do, the most amount of shenanigans with lands. In case the locked hothouse, right? 4 mana, you may play an additional land on each of your turns. So, again, an enchantment that allows us to play an additional land. And then you solve it, right? You're going to be solving the case of the locked hothouse, right? And to solve that, you have to have 7 lands out in play. And once it's solved, you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may play lands and cast creature and enchantment spells from the top of your library. So the creature and enchantment spells, you can play lands if you have the additional ability to play additional lands, right? Which this card does give you. But playing the creatures and enchantments, you can do that with the energy that you have. So if you have energy and you're able to look at the top card at any time, right? Now you have to follow timing rules here. You can't play creatures on somebody else's turn unless you have the flash ability. Some way to do that at instant speed, but you don't have that, so you do have to follow timing rules. But you can look at the top card of your library and play those with your energy that you have from Nissa. So, great stuff. Druid class, this is a great one. Whenever land enters the battlefield on your control, you gain 1 life, but if you pay 3 mana, you can level this up to level 2. This came out of the Dungeons & Dragons set. So as a druid, you're leveling up. Right, so as you level up, you may play an additional land on each of your turns. And that's what we're trying to do in this deck, is just, how many cards can I get out that say, you can play an additional land? And that's what I'm trying to do, is play so many additional lands, it's ridiculous. Right, so that it does that, but it also, when it becomes level 3, target land you control becomes a creature with haste. This creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control at all times, right? So if I have 0 lands, it's going to die. But if I have 36 lands, it's a 36-36. So, and it stays out on the battlefield. It does not go away, it does not get sacrificed. It still counts as a land, but it's also a creature with possibly gigantic power, which you can use to great effect in a Bracket 3 deck, because I think a lot of Bracket 3 is going to be damage-related combat stuff. I'm sure there's some shenanigans you could do with some sort of combo. But really, Bracket 3, you're not really supposed to be doing, chained combos to great effect. You're just kind of in here doing, some pretty cool optimized magic that doesn't necessarily happen in the first few turns. And as you'll see with this deck, when we get into the gameplay part, you'll see like where this deck kind of shines, what turns it kind of comes out. So we'll get into all that. Exploration, play an initial land, Guardian Project. Each non-token creature that enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card if it did not share a type or name. Right, same name as the creature that you previously cast. So Guardian Project, great for this deck because every creature in here is different. All right, then Overlaid Terrain. I found this card. This is an old card. I was like, what is this craziness? This is an enchantment that says Overlaid Terrain comes into play, sacrifice all lands you control. Thank you very much. I will do that. And then lands you control have add 2 mana of any one color to your mana pool. That's lands you control. So think about this. We got all our lands out. We do an Overlaid Terrain. We sack all those lands, and then we do our little Aftermath Specialist, bring all lands back on the battlefield. All those landfall triggers happen. Now, every one of those lands, even if it's a fetch land, and we're out of basic lands to go like get out of our library, that fetch land now taps for 2 mana of any one color. And even our specialized lands tap for 2 mana of any one color. So, boom. Like, this card is amazing for this deck. This is like one of the best cards you could possibly get. So another great card, Mending of Dominaria. Mill 2 cards, you may put a creature card from your graveyard into your hand. So not only does it kind of forgive you for milling those 2 cards, when you get to the third part of the saga, right, that'll be 3 turns. When you get to the third part of the saga, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Yes. Again, shenanigans with lands re-entering. So, are people going to try and like get rid of your graveyard possibly? Sure. But, I mean, this deck still has the ability to regrow that graveyard pretty quickly. And if one of your 2, like, reshuffle your graveyard into your library cards, like Gaia's Blessing or Kozilek, haven't been exiled yet, then you got a pretty good chance of, like, maintaining a pretty stable deck even through getting your graveyard exiled completely, and that was like a big chunk. You can still kind of recover with this deck and still possibly win because it has a lot of like different outs and stuff like that, so it's pretty survivable in my opinion. And then a new card from the Duskmourn set called Walk-In Closet, which my wife was very fond of when we bought this house. So you may play lands from your graveyard. Yet another way to play lands from your graveyard. You can play that for just the 3 mana, right? The 1 green and 2. And then just that part of the room will be open. And then you can open the other part of the room anytime that's still on the battlefield. So that is an enchantment, and it will be on the battlefield as a room that's open. And then you can open the other part of the room anytime, which is Forgotten Cellar, and then it does a thing, right? Alright, let's move on to our artifacts. So artifacts here, Aetherflux Conduit, right? 6 mana, but we can cast that with energy. We don't need to spend the 6 mana to do that. Whenever you cast a spell, you get a amount of energy equal to the amount of mana spent to cast that spell. When you're short on energy supply, using your mana, then to cast your spells is going to give you, so let's say you had, like in the case before, you had like 3 landfall triggers, you had 6 energy. Now you are just shy of being able to cast some huge spell, a Great Hinge maybe, and you don't have enough mana to do that, but you have a smaller spell. You cast that spell for like 3, you get 3 energy, and now you have the required, so you'll have 9 energy at that point. You'll have the required 8 to go ahead and cast one of these other permanent spells using the energy from Nissa, right? As long as Nissa's out. So make sure Nissa stays out. That's the whole point. So then you can cast like the Great Hinge, for instance, for that 8 energy, and now you have another great tool that's going to add to, your draw effects and the ability for you to gain life and also put some counters on your creature. The Great Hinge, a great card for this deck, and any deck really that's green. That you can use it in effectively. So other artifacts we got here. By the way, the Aetherflux Conduit, back to that real quick. The Aetherflux Conduit says you can also pay 50 energy. So let's just say you just built up a bunch of energy. You didn't use the energy for anything. You were just using your mana. And you built up enough energy to get to this 50. You can draw 7 cards and you may cast any number of spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. So, yeah, super good. All right, Aetherflux Reservoir. So when we're casting all those spells and we're gaining life, there's a lot of things that gain us life in this deck here, and just like odd things like your Zurin Orb and your Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot and all that stuff. We have just like little gain life stuff here and there. But if you get Aetherflux Reservoir out and you're casting a bunch of spells, you're using your energy to cast spells, you're using mana to cast spells. You have lots of resources to like cast spells with. You're gonna gain that life pretty quickly, and then you can pay that 50 life. And just this is another way to take out your opponents, right? So you can deal 50 damage to a target creature or player by paying 50 life. So if you're gaining a whole bunch of life, like through Zurin Orb and all that kind of stuff, shenanigans, then yeah, that's a great way to end the game as well. So Aetherworks Marvel, this is the one I was talking about earlier, and why I kind of kept things like Secura Tribuilder in there and the Aftermath Analyst, right? So the Aftermath Analyst is a sacrifice effect. You have to sacrifice that creature. It leaves, battlefield goes to the graveyard. So whenever a permanent with Aetherflux Marvel, right, 4 mana, legendary artifact, whenever a permanent you control is put in the graveyard, you get an energy, right? So you get another energy trigger from things going into the graveyard. And that even counts for your lands because it's permanents, right? So whenever a permanent you control is put in the graveyard. So imagine we did that enchantment with Aetherflux Marvel out, and we had a whole bunch of lands out, like 17 lands or whatever. And we did that enchantment right there that sacrifices all of our lands. Now you get 17 Aetherflux Marvel triggers, and you get 17 energy for that. Then it even says you can pay 6 energy. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast spells from among them without paying their mana cost. Put the rest of the bottom of your library. So cast a spell from among them. So then you can, whatever it is, you paid that 6 energy to look at those top 6 cards. Whatever is there that you need at that time, those top 6 cards, you can now cast that. So great card. Conduit of Worlds, also another great way to play lands from the graveyard in artifact form. 2 green and 2. You can play lands from your graveyard, and then you can tap it and target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, right, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn. Activate it only as a sorcery. So this is likely something that you're going to do in your second main phase. You can do a lot and not cast any spells in a turn with this deck. And then if you have something important that maybe got milled with Mending of Dominaria, or it got milled with the Analyst, or it got milled just some way, shape, or form because you were doing Dredge with Life from the Loam or something, then this is a way to, like, if one of those cards went in the graveyard and you're like, ooh, I needed that back, you can actually cast it using Conduit of Worlds, right? It'll let you get one of those cards out of your graveyard. And you can do that each turn. But it is a permanent, so again, you'd have to have Flash or something. Right, Crucible of Worlds, oldie but a goodie. Everybody knows it. You may play lands from your graveyard. It's just straight up Decoction module. Whenever a creature enters, you get an energy. We have a lot of creatures. This is even going to count for token creatures. So any creature enters, you get an energy. Expedition Map, right? Another way to sacrifice this artifact. Search your library for a land card, reveal it, and put it in your hand. Alright, Goyfs Aetherheart. A legendary artifact that is pretty awesome. So whenever Goyfs Aetherheart or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you get 2 energy. Enters the battlefield. So this is not a cast. This is not a token thing. This is just a straight up, whenever the heart or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you get 2 energy. Right? And then it also, yes, we cannot spam extra turns in Bracket 3, but we can definitely take an extra turn. Right? And Goyfs Aetherheart allows you to do that, especially if you're kind of in a position to win at that point and you have a huge army that maybe you've just created with a bunch of energy. You got a bunch of 6/6s, or you just got a bunch of the like the Stone Idol Generator. You got a bunch of those 6/12 colorless artifact creatures out. Whatever the case may be, you might have the winning board state at that point, and you just need that one extra turn. Well, with Gonti's Aether Heart, you can pay 8 energy, exile the heart, and then take an extra turn after this one. So it is great in many aspects. Then Idol of Oblivion, draw a card, activate this only if you've created a token. We create lots of tokens in this deck. We have the 2 Tyler's Tracker and Tyler's Provisioner. They're creating treasure tokens. We got all kinds of tokens being created in this deck. Most likely, Idol of Oblivion is going to be activated, and you'll be able to draw an extra card. See, your Sundial is great for Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under control, you may pay 2. We're going to be able to pay 2 quite often because we're going to be having quite a bit of landfall and quite a bit of lands out. And if you do pay 2, you draw a card. A lot of draw effects. Stone Isle Generator, kind of a cool one here. Whenever a creature you control attacks, you get an energy. And then you can pay the 6 energy, create a huge 6/12 colorless construct creature with trample. Activate only as a sorcery. So you can only activate that on your turn. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work with Seedborn Muse. And then another fun, old, tricky kind of card here is Storm Cauldron. So in playtesting, I got this card down one time. It is a little tricky because basically it does say each player can put an additional land into play. Whenever a land is tapped for mana, return that land to its owner's hand. Now, this is good for this deck, but it can also be kind of diminishing returns. So the more lands that you're tapping for mana to do, to crack clues or do whatever, cast spells, those lands are going to come back to your hand. You may have creatures out on the battlefield or whatever that says play an additional land. You can play those additional lands, but you're always kind of using them, so they're always coming back to your hand, which is good, but you can get to the point of diminishing returns where basically all the lands are coming back to your hand at this point, and you don't have enough additional land plays to keep some more lands out on the battlefield. So there is that part of it that I noticed, but not really a big deal because you're still always going to be having enough lands in your hand with this card to then on the next turn play a bunch of lands and still keep going, right? Really, because the lands just keep bouncing back up to your hand all the time. Oh, sorry about that, buddy. Didn't mean to hit you there. You're all right. All right, and then of course the Great Hinge, we talked about that already. What we was puzzled on, we had talked about that. We get a little bit of energy, we get some gain some life. We can also sacrifice it, which is good for our Aetherworks Marvel, right? And then one of the great cards in here is Zuran Orb. Let's imagine a Mending of Dominaria scenario is about to go off on turn 3. Or you even have the Aftermath Analyst that says return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield. Either of those two things are happening, right? Big, return all lands from graveyard to battlefield. So Zuran Orb, in response to those triggers, right? You sack the Analyst or your third turn in the saga for Mending of Dominaria happens. In response to that, I can then sacrifice whatever lands I have out there all to Zuran Orb and gain 2 life per land sacrificed. Then all those lands will go to the graveyard prior to the trigger happening for the Analyst or Mending. And now all of those lands that I just sacrificed will go back onto the battlefield. And if it's a whole bunch of them, let's say I have 2 triggers happening. Let's say I have a Mending trigger happening and I can trigger Analyst still. I can do this twice now. That's what we're talking about, right, Cha? We're gonna do so much land falling, it's gonna be ridiculous. All right, so speaking of lands, let's get into those. There's 36 of them. For me, that's a lot of lands. It's like an intimidating amount of lands. I'm like, I don't normally play with 36 lands, but as we saw in the Graveyard Overdrive Precon, right? The Diss of the Restless Precon video that we did a while back. That deck came with 39 lands, so as a Precon, 38 to 39 lands is like kind of normal. Some key lands in here that we need to talk about. So everybody knows what Aether Hub. Aether Hub is just like it just adds an energy and you can tap for any color. We don't really care about that because we're only playing green, but we just get the energy, so it's cool. Boseiju is a great way to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land that your opponent has, or maybe even your own. Who knows? That if you want to do that to your own stuff and then have it recur, could be a possibility. Because if you do that with one of your non-basic lands that you have here, then Boseiju not only goes to the graveyard, but so does the land that you just killed, and you get to go get a basic land out of your deck and put that on the battlefield, so you get a landfall trigger. And then if you have Boseiju and Lotus Field, for instance, in the graveyard, and you have some sort of recur lands kind of effect happening, like Mending, then those lands are just going to come right back on the battlefield. How fun. So, some other cool things you can do, well, lands that you just need in this deck, I think, in my opinion, because they do not require anything. They require no tapping. They require nothing other than entering the battlefield for their effect to happen. And that is Broker's Hideout, and this is all from the new Capenna set. So Broker's Hideout, Cabaret Courtyard, and then the other one, which is the Riveteer's Outlook. These lands, all of these three, get you a forest. What it says is when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it. So it immediately gets sacrifices as it comes into the battlefield. When you do, search your library for a basic land of these types, forest being the main one that we want, and then it comes on the battlefield, and then you shuffle and you gain 1 life. So yet another way to gain life. But still, you get that landfall trigger twice. It automatically happens. So these lands are like a must-have for this deck. And then on top of, and then all the rest of these are either basically sacrifice lands or fetch lands, right? As you can see there, Fabled Passage, Cryptic Caves is a great one to recur because you can sacrifice it and draw. So you sacrifice that land. You have to pay 1, but you sacrifice that land and then draw a card. And activate it only if you control 5 or more lands, which a lot of times you will have 5 lands out, for sure. Especially with this deck. It's ridiculous. Alright, so our one game changer, which is kind of like a ridiculous... I don't even know why this is on the game changer. It's a ridiculous card to have on the game changers list, in my opinion. This is like really one of the only gripes that I have, is that somehow my favorite land in all of Magic, Glacial Chasm, which my play group knows that I play with quite often, especially in like Lord Windgrace decks or other landfall decks that I do. Basically, it allows you to, when it comes into play, sacrifice a land. So this is key for this deck, right? It sacrifices a land, so that gives you a land going in the graveyard kind of trigger. And then you can't attack, which you don't really care about attacking at certain points of the game. Really what you want to do is just survive through the other people, you know, killing off each other and dealing damage to each other. You don't really want to be like part of that until like, you can come in strong and like win. So then all damage dealt to you is reduced to 0. Now you do get dealt damage, but it's all reduced to 0. So yeah, and then it has a cumulative upkeep of 2 life, which means each upkeep you'll pay 2 life the first time, and it's cumulative 2 life. So then a time counter, or whatever the counter is, the upkeep counter will go on there, onto Glacial Chasm, and then you'll have to pay 4 life, because now you can choose to not pay this upkeep cost. Glacial Chasm will then go to the graveyard. So you don't have to pay that 2 life. You can just have Glacial Chasm out for that 1 turn where you needed to not be attacked and not take damage, and then now you're set up because your stuff didn't die or you didn't die, and you'll have that turn to do whatever shenaniganry you wanted. So there you go. Glacial Chasm, one of the best lands in Magic ever. It doesn't tap for mana, but if you have that enchantment out that says all your lands tap for 2 of any mana color, or anything like that that says your lands tap for mana, then you're good. And you really don't care if it taps for mana or not, because you're using energy a lot of times. And it's just there to do its job, which is to reduce all that damage to 0. So another cool, like Lotus Field, Lotus Veil, they kind of do similar things where you're sacrificing lands and then you get the bonus of having tap to add 3 mana of any one color. So Lotus Field, and then the other difference is that Lotus Field comes in tapped and Lotus Veil does not come in tapped. So that's kind of the difference there. They're equal almost, because you lose out on lands or whatever either way. Lotus Veil is actually like a little bit better because you still get 3 mana versus the 2 that you would get with Lotus Field, as if there were like only 2 lands out, because it comes in tapped, right? I mean, you could play an Amulet of Vigor in this deck, but not really any point. You're just looking for landfall triggers in general, and Amulet of Vigor's kind of like not necessary. You could put it in though and get the untap effects, you know, and stuff like that, but it's not really necessary at all. What else? Yeah, all your fetch lands, Misty Rainforest, Verdant Catacombs, all those. Yavimaya Cradle Growth. So that was another one I put in here because of things like Glacial Chasm, because of so once you run out of lands in your deck, because you're going to get to that point where you're gonna, especially with this deck, this deck is just ridiculous to where it will pull all the lands out of your deck. So once that happens, you're gonna need a way to utilize those lands. You can still tap them and search your library and fail to find, and you'll get a land going to the graveyard type of trigger from your Verdant Catacombs and Prismatic Vistas and stuff like that. And even your Broker's Hideouts, because immediately whenever they enter the battlefield, they get sacrificed anyway. So you'll fail to find, you'll still get triggers off of that for like Titania and stuff like that, creating a 5/3 whenever land goes to the graveyard. Stuff like that is great. But for the lands that can sit on the battlefield and be useful, you can still have Yavimaya Cradle Growth out and turn them into forests and have them be usable. So I left it in there for that. Sunscorched Desert, when it enters the battlefield, deals 1 damage to target player. You can do that to effect as well, where you're recurring it, getting it out of your graveyard, especially with Life from the Loam. So kind of really, once you run out of spells, like you run out of, I mean, almost by that time, like the game should pretty much kind of be over at that point. But once you run out of like other ways to recur lands from the graveyard, Life from the Loam is going to become like one of the key cards, right? Late game. Let's say the game goes on for a while. Life from the Loam is going to be the part where you're getting the most effectiveness, because you're dredging 3, and then you're able to recur Life from the Loam, cast it again, get 3 lands out of your graveyard, right? And then those lands should be whatever is going to be the most effective for you at that moment, right? So there you go. All right, now we're going to go into kind of a scenario here where I did a test play with this deck on Moxfield, and I'm going to show you I'm going to set up the scenario for you a little bit and kind of show you the battlefield. A lot of Magic players, when they see this, they'll kind of be able to like pick and parse through what's out on the battlefield and be like, oh, this is about to happen, you know. So it's kind of cool. Let's take a look at it right here. So this is our battlefield. It's turn 9. So on our upkeep, if we start from the far, if we're starting from the far left, Rampaging Aetherhood is at 5, and we have 34 energy. So we could put a bunch of counters on Aetherhood. We could put all of the energy onto Aetherhood and get back 39 energy in regard. So in as that trigger is on the stack, we can use the ability that he has. He may pay energy if you do put a +1 counter. So in response to that trigger being on the stack, put all 34 energy into putting counters on Aetherhood, and then get back 39 energy instead of 5, which we currently have. So there's a thing we could do there. You could and I even like some of this stuff is still like tapped from the last turn. So Aetherworks Marvel is going to be untapped. Great Hint is going to be untapped on all these lands, right? We have also the Evolution Sage that's out. We have a Loot out, so we can play an additional land. We have Titania on the board, and we have Tireless Provisioner on the battlefield, which is going to create us either a treasure or a food. We also have Aetherflux Conduit out, and that could, once we net a bunch of energy, we could do the pay 50 energy and do the thing, which we're going to net a metric ton of energy at this point, because we have Gonti's Aetherheart out. So we have Tireless Provisioner, Gonti's Aetherheart, which are going to be synergistic here, along with the Evolution Sage and Nissa, right? So all of these things are going to play into what we're about to do, and that is with Mending of Dominaria. It was on its second turn last turn. This turn is going to turn 3. Once I draw the card, now the third Saga part will go off. With that trigger on the stack, I have Zurin Orb out. What I'm going to do is, so draw is like, once we get through the upkeep and we do the Aetherhood thing and we've regained a bunch of energy, now we go to our draw step. After we draw, Mending of Dominaria is going to happen. So when Mending of Dominaria trigger happens, we're now in our main phase. We're going to add all of this mana to our mana pool with our lands that exist out on the battlefield. All that mana is going to get tapped into our mana pool, And then we're going to sack all of these lands to that Zurin Orb, gaining 2 life for each of those lands. Once we sack all those lands to that Zurin Orb, then we will allow the trigger for Mending of Dominaria to occur. You can see where I'm going with this, right? We're going to gain a whole bunch of life. All of those lands from Mending of Dominaria that are in the graveyard, even the ones that are in the graveyard currently, plus the ones that are out on the battlefield that just got sacked to Zurin Orb, are all going to come back out of the battlefield now. All of those lands come out. You get the triggers from Nissa. You get the triggers from the lands going into the graveyard from Titania, creating a bunch of 5/3 elemental tokens. You get the Proliferate trigger from Evolution Sage from the lands entering. You get all of the treasures entering from Provisioner. Those treasures entering are artifacts entering the battlefield. Gonti's Aetherheart says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, another artifact enters the battlefield, get 2 energy. So we're about to gain a ton of energy. This is turn 9, so for a bracket 3 deck, like turn 9 to go off and go crazy nuts like this is where you want to be at, I think. It was pretty consistent in the games that I did for test play with this deck. Turn 8, 7, 8, 9 was 10 was kind of where you were, and you were like at this kind of level of the deck is kind of doing its thing at this point. And I think at bracket 3, you should be by turn 7, 8, 9, be doing your thing and going off and trying to win the game or do whatever it is your deck was designed to do at that point, right? And really crazy interaction here. So all those lands back in. Once all the lands come back in, all the treasures, all the energy, and then the energy thing happens, you can then use the Aetherflux Conduit because you'll have a ton of energy at this point. I didn't even count all the energy. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be well over 50. So you can use that 50 energy then and put all of the energy back into Aetherhood and attack for a huge amount. But anyway, like, to me, it was just like a really fun build to do and you know, I got to call a deck Big Nissa Energy, so that was fun. And for all my Navy folks, yes, those are IT Sparks up there. But you had to wait till the end of the video to find that out. So anyway, that's our deck. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate everybody kind of going through it with me. And again, take it, build whatever you want with it, do the best you can with it, and make sure you give us a like and a subscribe if you like this video. So totally appreciate that. So anyway, thanks again from Bad Goyfs. We're gonna sign off, right, Mr. Goyf? Ready to go? He's ready. We're rocking out. See you guys later. Take it easy. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to support us directly, go to patreon.com/badgoyfs. Also, follow us on all social media. Links in the description below. And remember, you're all my Goyfs, and I love you. Bye-bye.